helping Jeff prep part of his some of his rooms and walls for painting. So I really have to come down to Calgary more often because he always coerces me into telling some stories in front of this video camera. And the one he asked me to tell was about an epidemic of smallpox in 1966 in Tanzania, and then a polio epidemic a year later. One of the sickest patients I've ever seen was this woman that came in with smallpox, and that was the first clue that we had a smallpox epidemic breaking out in Tanzania at Colinville Hospital, 100 miles southeast of the southeast corner of Lake Victoria. One of the sickest people I've ever seen. She had a fever of about 106 Fahrenheit. She just looked so toxic. You couldn't lay a postage stamp anywhere on her body without covering one or two pox. We of course couldn't admit her to a hospital, so we housed her in a terrible mud brick shack with a thatched roof, which really was a hovel. But that was the only way we could isolate her, and then we would only allow the nursing staff that had demonstrable smallpox scars on their arms to take her food and nurse her and so on, and they did a marvelous job. But we wouldn't allow any that didn't have any smallpox scars. And then we immediately started a smallpox vaccination with the cooperation of the Tanzanians on the Shinyanga District Council. Shinyanga was the nearby town. And they said, yes, we'll have the hospital here donate their hygiene workers and so on to help you if you run the program. So we started. We were using calf lymph from England, which was the standard smallpox vaccination vaccine at that time. Well, it wasn't doing the job. People would get vaccinated, and a week or so later, they'd still come down with smallpox. And by this time, it should have been attenuated. So I fired off a telegram to the to the Minister of Health in Dar es Salaam, who I knew, and said, dear sir, this calf lymph isn't doing the job. Haven't you got something better? He sent back a telegram and he said, I've just ordered some from Moscow that is really good. And he said, it'll be airlifted out and we'll send it up by the fastest means to you. And so a week later, about 4 or 6 boxes arrived, quite good sized. And I still remember reading factory number 7, Moscow. Pharmaceutical factory number 7, Moscow. Well, this was powerful smallpox vaccine. It really produced a reaction and left people with a scar, some of them an inch in diameter. But, you know, it stopped the epidemic in its tracks. It was one of the most exciting things I've done in medicine, certainly as far as public health is concerned. And then, about a year later, we admitted the daughter of the business manager with polio. Both her legs were paralyzed. And we soon found out that there were a few other cases that had just occurred. So we realized there was a polio epidemic that was starting. Well, because my second oldest brother, Dave, had it when he was 3, and my sister had it when she was 12, and both of them ended up with very significant amount of paralysis, but coped with it exceptionally well. Both of them have essentially lived normal lives and been very productive, married, had children, and you know, we've always been proud of what they've done, despite their having had polio since childhood. So this was the first thing that went through my mind. Having lived with 2 siblings with polio, I've got to do everything I can to do my part in trying to stop this epidemic. So I talked to the business manager at Colinville Hospital, who was a Tanzanian, whose daughter was admitted with polio. I said, let's go in and see the district council in Shinyanga and see if they will grant us some money to start a vaccination campaign against polio, because by this time we had the oral vaccine. You know, you have the kid open, or the child open, or teenager open their mouth, and you drop a drop in, and then you make sure they swallow it and give them a swish of water. And that's it. It protects them. One dose. So, with trepidation, we went in to see them because things were pretty dicey in Tanzania as far as Tanzanian people in power accepting any suggestions or advice from expatriates, especially whites. So we both knew that we had to be very careful, and we prayed about it on the way in, and then we walked in, and James Malonga, with his excellent Swahili, introduced the subject and why we were there. He'd all made the appointment, and there was about 20 of these men sitting around the table, and, you know, government officials can look a little fierce sometimes when they're approached, and they didn't really look too friendly. But I told the story about James Malonga's daughter coming in with both legs paralyzed, and then hearing about others, and then another couple of cases coming into the hospital just in the last 3 days. And said, you know, we've got this terrible polio epidemic that started, and it'll spread like wildfire. So we've got to start vaccinating. And I said, we'll donate hospital staff, and if you can get the government hospital in Shinyanga, the town that was 10 miles from Kondo Hospital, to send as many of their staff as they can to help us, we'll arrange them in teams and send them out. And, you know, you could visibly see the expressions, particularly on the chairman's face, soften as I went on. And then I mentioned the reason I know that polio does so much damage, like many of you do, because we had polio epidemics in Tanzania in the years past. I said, because I had 2 siblings with polio. And I said it handicapped both of them, but both of them, through God's grace and power, really surmounted them and coped very well, and have essentially lived normal lives, married, and have children, and so on, and great careers, and that. But I said, it's a devastating disease, and we can stop it now with this vaccine that we have. But I said, we need money to buy the vaccine, and we'll ask you to supply the gas for the volunteers from Shinyanga Hospital, or the staff from Shinyanga Hospital that travels around. And we want you to send word out to all the headmen in all the districts around, so that they'll arrange for people to come to certain points at a certain hour in a day, and then the next day and the next day. And I said, you know, I think in about a week, 10 days, we can vaccinate probably a good portion of the ones that should be vaccinated, the 400,000 people in this area. And then the chairman smiled, and he said, tell me how much money you need. So I gave the figure that I thought was high, and yet I thought was modest. And I thought, you know, I think it might do the job. And right away he said, yes, we'll do it. All you guys are in favor, aren't you? He said, yes, absolutely. I was so thrilled. So we sent a telegram off to Dar es Salaam to get this vaccine in pronto, and it arrived, and we sent out the teams. And again, as I've often said, it was like shutting off a tap. You know, if you picture an epidemic as water pouring out of a tap, disease pouring out of a tap, and you reach there over and you just turn the tap off. That's the way it happened with this polio epidemic, just like the smallpox epidemic before. Again, to me, it was one of the biggest thrills in the 56 years I practiced medicine. And I can see why people involved in public health get so disgusted with the rest of the healthcare system, because people don't seem to appreciate what they're doing. But because we've conquered diphtheria and tetanus and polio and smallpox and so on, people have forgotten what terrible diseases they are. And so why should I bother to have my kids vaccinated and so on? I've got other things to do. I want to watch the football game tonight. So it really was very exciting. And to this day, I look back and I thank God for having a small role in both of these epidemics and stopping them. Great fun.